How many more big games is LaFleur going to lose before somebody says, maybe there's a problem here? Okay, let's just go through it quietly. Tampa Bay, this is Big Daddy. Mm-hmm. Tampa Bay, playoff game, home. Okay. San Francisco, playoff game, home.
Yep.
Detroit, playoff game to get in playoff, home. I mean, at what point does this guy have to have some accountability? Like, at Detroit. Now, I would say this. Detroit is not known as an elite defense. You would agree with this?
I would 100% agree.
They hold him to 4 for 12 on third down. In 2 games, he scored 25 points against Detroit. 25 points. The Carolina Panthers, who are sitting out of this, I think they scored 38 and ran and had almost 580 yards against them. I understand it was a different game. I get that. But at some point, what is the deal here, Fem? And Big Daddy wants answers.
I think he deserves answers. And I thought just from the get-go, the Packers, it seemed a little nervy. Now, I thought that maybe Detroit, if Green Bay got up on them early, they could maybe get Detroit reeling and going uphill to where they could pull away from this thing. But it felt like they just kept letting the Lions hang around. And then ultimately in the second half, the Lions gained some control. They gained that confidence and then really controlled that entire fourth quarter. But after the game, here's what Matt LaFleur had to say about the loss there with the Packers eliminated now from postseason contention.
Yeah, no, you got to give them credit. They came ready to play, and certainly, did more than what we did. And we had some things that some opportunities that we didn't capitalize on, and then we had some silly mistakes that certainly cost us. But again, you got to give them credit, and I feel for our locker room. I feel for our coaches and everybody, our fans that showed out tonight. And I just, it wasn't enough. We didn't do enough.
Well, he feels bad at least.
Well, I mean, look, it certainly feels bad. But to me, like, this was a very winnable game. I felt like watching this that, again, I didn't think Goff was playing. I thought Goff was playing like the Goff for the table for 2 by the Heaters a little bit. I didn't think he was. Now, he made the great throw for the touchdown pass, and he made throws. But there was a lot of throws in that game where even Collinsworth was saying that, boy, he's just not throwing the ball very good, right? And it didn't seem like it. But I think a lot of this is going back to give Aaron Glenn credit. I mean, Aaron Glenn outcoached LaFleur. I mean, he just outcoached him. He doesn't have as many good players, but he outcoached him. And, and this is 2 games now. I mean, when you're 4 for 12 on third down, against them, you had 28 rushes for 103 yards in the game. Meanwhile, Carolina's running up and down the field on them. I know it was a cold day. I understand that. I get all that. But to me, this is a game, like, how many more of these big games are you going to continue to lose? And everybody wants to blame the quarterback, but at some point, this is a 3-dimensional game. This is a 3-dimensional game. And I don't even think Detroit played their A game. I really don't. I don't think so. And I mean, the undisciplined nature of those of Walker that got thrown out of the game.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, that to me was embarrassing. I'm so happy the league threw his ass out of the game. I mean, can you imagine of all weeks to push a medical trainer, somebody coming trainer? Could you imagine of that?
It's just ridiculous. And it's just,
I mean, it's inexcusable any week, but imagine this week with number 3 on the field. We're honoring this kid. We're honoring this kid because of the first responders are so incredible, and you're going to push the guy who comes out to help a kid on the field.
It's undisciplined.
I mean, to me, I watched this Packer team, in fairness to Big Daddy, like I'd never have seen it. Like everybody said, what was that tweet? Somebody said, you don't want to play the Packers come playoff time. I'm like, I don't see it. Like, I haven't seen it. Like, explain to me why you didn't want to play the Packers. Like, explain to me why. Because they beat Chicago? Because they beat the Rams? Because they beat Miami when Tua couldn't complete a pass in the second half? Because they killed Minnesota last week? I mean, like, tell me why you don't want to play them. Like, I never thought they were I thought Miami was going to blow them out of the building until the second half. Like, to me, they never, like, I know that I thought they were going to be a bad 7th seed. I really did. I don't think San Francisco was going to have a little bit of problem with him. I know Collinsworth was making a big deal out of that right tackle, Tom, how his foot, all that bullshit. Like, watch him get his ass kicked by Bosa the next week. That was going to be good. Remember? So, like, are you kidding me? Like, at some point, you got to sit there and say, when are we going to win a big game here? We got the best. If this kid retires, they won 2 Super Bowls as a franchise with Favre and Rodgers. And both those quarterbacks are in the top 100 players of all time in the National Football League.
And to our credit here on the podcast, we'll give ourselves a little pat on the back. We didn't second guess this whole Packers dangerous 7-seed thing. We first guessed this because I asked you the question. I was like, hey, if the Packers get into the postseason, do you think they could be dangerous? And you didn't even hesitate. You said, no. There's no way because this team has way too many flaws, and it starts with the head coach and what he does. Undisciplined. It's an unserious game plan that they put together, and they just had a lack of execution there. But I don't want to let Rodgers off the hook either, because we always say on the motto of this podcast, if we see something, we have to say something. He wasn't good last night, and especially in that second half, some of those throws that he was making down the field. Kirby Joseph picked him off twice. One of them was called back for the illegal hands to the face. Now, I know some guys had drops. Romeo Doubs, his drops has kind of been plaguing him his rookie season. But for Rodgers, especially to his standards, in a big game at home, I don't think he played well at all. I thought he was pretty bad last night.
Yeah, I don't think he played well either, but I think he's going to take all the blame. Of course, when LaFleur was 13-3, he took all the credit. The guy was MVP 2 years in a row. But let's be fair here. Rodgers hasn't been the same player this year that he was last year. He averaged 6.8 yards per attempt. He can't get the ball. He only threw 26 touchdown passes. He threw way more interceptions. I think the whole problem with the Packers has been the design problem from the start of the year, that they relying on these rookies to come in and help them at receiver, thinking they could run Devontae Adams' offense when that's not what they can run. Like, they had to change who they were as a football team. They never did. They never were good enough on defense. You know what their plus minuses and point differential was for the final for the year? They gave up 371. They scored 370. Is that like a really good team?
Nope.
How long did they go with Rodgers as the punt returner before they went to Nixon? Like, how long did they go with that? Like, at some point, don't you sit there and say, here's what I have, here's the strength of my team, here's what I'm going to do? I never got that sense from them. And look, let's be clear here. They didn't play exactly the hardest schedule. They played, the NFC East, which even though they got the giant 2 teams going to the playoffs, they weren't great. They played the AFC East. They have 2 teams going, which were not great, right? Like, it wasn't like they played this hard schedule.
It really is mind-numbing what the Green Bay Packers did. The setup was right there for them. Everything over the last 3 weeks broke their way to try to sneak into the playoffs. They controlled their own destiny. They were the only team in the postseason. It was them in New England heading into yesterday, controlled their own destiny, both of which lost. But Green Bay 8-9 is how they end the season. And a lot of the questions now, Michael, now that we're heading into the offseason, are going to be about Aaron Rodgers and if he's going to come back, is he going to retire? A lot was made on the broadcast last night about how he told Jameson Williams, hey, I'm going to hang on to this jersey. I don't want to swap my jersey. And it felt like he was kind of taking in the moment when he was walking off the field with Randall Cobb there in the final moments. Do you think that we see Rodgers back? Because his cap hits are pretty outrageous here. Because if he plays, it's $31.6 million, which is expected from a quarterback. If they were to trade him or if he retired, he's $40.3 million. If they were to cut him, I don't think that's ever going to happen. It'd be a $99.7 million cap hit. Do you think we see Rodgers as the quarterback for the Packers to start next season?
I think that what he certainly has, I think there's obviously, you got to see the contract, right? And so there's a potential, I think there's a potential out in the contract for 2024, right? So that's the thing that you've got to really understand is what does that out? Option bonus to be exercised, and that's got more money in the guarantees. So I think there's a lot of conversation about that, if they can get out of the deal or if he can get out of the deal. And I think that's what's going to happen. And, and then I think that there'll be a dead cap hit of $24 million if he opts out after the 24 season, but 23, he's still locked in. So he can't opt out until 20. This doesn't really matter until 24. And he's got enormous amounts of guarantee in there. So how does he get out of that? He's got a 23 option bonus at 58.3. guaranteed, must be exercised between March 1st and then. So, like, how does he get out of that? How did they get away from that?
I don't think you can. I think he's going to be their guy. I mean, and
why would he retire?
Yeah.
Why would he say, okay, I don't want this money, I'm going to retire? Like, why would he?
It doesn't make
and
a
where
lot
are they
of
going?
sense.
And where are they going? I mean, Jordan Love?
Well, word on the streets, at least from what I was reading up on, is that Jordan Love might ask for a trade this upcoming offseason because he wants to play. So.
Sure he does. I mean, but here, this goes back to the same. It goes right back to, Mr. Murphy, the president of the team. I mean, he's built this, right? He hired LaFleur to be the offensive coordinator, right? So he subcontracted that out. He's got Gutekunst over there to be the player personnel director, carry the title of GM. Everybody reports to him, and this is what he wanted. And so he subcontracted. There's no leadership in the building about, okay, here's where we're going, and this is why they have this up and down. Mm-hmm. He thought LaFleur was this up-and-coming offensive coach. Yeah, it's easy to be up-and-coming offensive coach when you got Aaron Rodgers.
After the game, Rodgers was asked about potentially retiring and his decision and what he wants to end up doing in 2023. He said, quote, "I'm not going to hold him hostage." So he knows that, hey, there's a timeline with the way the offseason works. So I'm assuming that means that he will let them know at least at some point in February or definitely before the new league year begins in March. But asked about hypothetically retiring and walking away from a guaranteed $58.3 million. He said, quote, "Money is energy, and I have made a ton of it, and I'm very thankful for this organization, the generational wealth that they've offered me." So I don't know if money's going to factor in, but money always has to play a factor, I would think. But I think he just returns, though. It just makes too much sense.
Well, I think the hardest part here about Green Bay is this, right? So Brady goes to New England, and the franchise is worth X, and by the time he leaves, it's worth X squared, right? Mm-hmm. And so Green Bay, how do you put the value on what he's enhanced the franchise for? Because the franchise is owned by the town. So there's really no institutional wealth that has been accumulated by the owner of the Packers, right? Whereas Kraft, certainly between Belichick and Brady and all the success, that value of the franchise has gone up because of that success. Now, Kraft can certainly take credit for it. He owns the team. But there is that value that goes in there. Here you can't quantify that value. So even though, money isn't important, there is kind of what he's been able to brand that team and make that team wealthier. That's worth something as well.
It's going to be an interesting offseason for the Green Bay Packers once again, just like it was last year, with the season ending with another home loss in a win and in type of situation. Thanks for watching the GM Shuffle with Michael Lombardi. And for more videos like this, make sure to subscribe to VSiN Live and the GM Shuffle podcast with Michael Lombardi, presented by DraftKings and VSiN, wherever you get your podcasts.